All right, I think I'll get started then. People will continue to trickle in as we go along. But I want to get right into it. Welcome everyone. Hi, my name is Rachel. I am the Environmental Education Coordinator at Reforest London. I currently work at our office, which is located at the Westminster Pond Centre here in London, Ontario. Um, I'm super excited. The site is being developed as London's first Centre for Environment and Sustainability. Really honored to be working at this space and to be able to host events like this, to welcome great people into our virtual space as well. So I just have a quick acknowledgement before we get into the topics of today. We are situated on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples, nations which have long-standing relationships with the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. We extend our recognition to our neighboring First Nations communities, the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation, who continue to steward the land today. We recognize the treaties of this area, such as the London Township Treaty of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum, among others, and understand that we are all treaty people. So welcome everyone. We're excited to have you be a part of the last webinar in our Getting to Know Your Green Space series. Stay tuned for more webinars coming in April and May in our webinar series following our conference about urban forestry happening this month. If you are interested in seeing more about the different webinars that we're putting on, then you can definitely check out our website. I just saw a question pop up. Will you be sending out recordings of these webinars? Those will be available at the end of the series. So if you have to pop out at any point, we'll definitely make these informational sessions available to you. So before I continue, we do want to extend our thanks to 2 Billion Trees funding, which is enabling us to do these webinars, run these webinars, and have amazing speakers like Ben, who is here today. So welcome, Ben. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, if you don't already know, Ben is extremely experienced in his field, spanning decades of work involving an off-grid lifestyle in the 1990s. He's crafted locally impactful yet globally relevant energy solutions and has a dedication to ecological restoration, revitalizing forests, prairies, and wetlands. As a consultant, he has had the privilege of contributing to large-scale renewable energy projects, representing First Nation communities, and conducting a traditional medicinal native plant inventory in what he calls the make you want to cry for joy every day you show up for work kind of experience. Transitioning this plant knowledge to urban settings, he has cultivated over 250 native plant species at his home and created a vibrant ecosystem within a village landscape. His recent initiative involved co-creating a groundbreaking 5,000 square foot nature sense ground at a laboratory elementary school in Toronto. And stay tuned as he is launching an online training program called Bringing Forests Home, a program about contributing to cumulative change through improving urban ecology in our own yards. So thank you so much, Ben, for being here. I will hand it over to you. Our participants, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will be ending this session with a Q&A. So you can hold off on waiting, or you can hold off on your questions until the end, or you can, again, put them in the chat. Feel free to introduce yourself and where you're zooming in from. And lastly, as I said, this webinar is being recorded. We'll share those with you at the end of this series, so within the next couple of weeks. All right, that's it for me. Over to you, Ben. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. This is super exciting. First time that I've presented using the Canva program, so let's hope it's pretty smooth here. Present with full screen. Let's see. Well, full screen, take away everybody. We'll try. Oh no, that's perfect. Yeah, so again, I really appreciate all of that, and I love how smooth you were, Rachel, and I didn't realize this is the last talk, but I'm super happy to be the anchor here. And I noticed a few names on there that I recognized, and usually when you speak in front of a crowd, you might have nerves, but when you recognize people that are out there and all have great experience and have been experimenting with this kind of stuff, it gives me some butterflies. So thank you so much for showing up, everybody. It's really appreciated. And so for some of you, this might be elementary, and for others, it might be a beginning. And just recognize there's the opportunity for the dialogue afterwards. So stick around if it even feels like it's not super advanced for you. And it's fine if it is super advanced for you. So the inspiration for bringing forest home, a lot of you, some of you might recognize the name and it sounds a little familiar. It's familiar to bringing nature home, which was put out by Douglas Talamy, I think about 12 or 14 years ago, a book about using native plants to attract insects in urban areas or outside of urban areas, which really helps rebuild the ecosystem in places, which is a lot of, which are many places where the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem is pretty much absent. And so I had the opportunity at a conference over a decade ago to sit with Douglas Talamy at lunch before his talk and talk to him about the process. At that point, I think I was 5 or 6 years into creating a natural ecosystem within a landlocked setting in Wortley Village, completely surrounded by the rest of the city, but not too far from the cove's environmentally significant areas. So some opportunity to receive a lot of visiting animals from that site once I had restored this area. So that was a really big inspiration in getting a chance to talk with Douglas Talamy and really work on some of the motives behind recovering an ecosystem within an urban setting. And that's what I've found really inspirational, is that we can do this in a very small space. And this was around the time that I was working with Carolinian Canada and the World Wildlife Fund Canada in creating a program called inthezonegardens.ca. That's the website. And it was modeled after my garden and a few other gardens, where we said, why don't we really start to promote this and see what we can do? And so you'll see the tagline here that says, we're rebuilding vibrant, resilient, and thriving forest ecosystems right outside our own door. And if we do it right, we can watch the world change around us. And it's literally what I'm about to show you. We went from lawn and maybe with the trees and some of the shrubs here, maybe 10 or 15 species, including some non-natives, to over 250 species of native plants right within the city. And there's still a lawn that you can, play catch on, you can have a barbecue. So it's not like we're going totally hippie garden on everybody in the neighborhood. Although the front yard, when I don't manicure it frequently enough in the summertime when it's growing, it does look like sometimes it's just overgrown. I'll show you some pictures of that. So bringing forests home, I realized that this is an opportunity very similar to the program offered by Carolinian Canada and World Wildlife Fund in the zonegardens.ca, is that we have millions of landowners. Let's mobilize them any way we can. If you can do this on your own and you are, great for you, and you get some extra tips here, that's incredible. That's what we're hoping for. And if you're looking for a little bump, join in the zonegardens.ca, take an online course like this. So it might seem a little salesy at the end, but I'm just offering what is out there for people who might want it. So the statement for this whole thing is that from the very beginning, we did this probably not in the right way. Most homes are often built by removing forests and thus removing people completely from nature. And we know that we can bring forests home to outdoor living spaces. And before we know it, there's an increasing number of wild birds and insects like butterflies that will return to bathe in the diverse nature right outside our door. And when I say forest, a lot of people will say, well, we're in the Great Lakes region, right? We're in the middle of several Great Lakes here. We have Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, the eastern part of Lake Huron, Georgian Bay. Within this area, most of the habitats initially were forests, but we know that we had a lot of tall grass prairie, and this often would intersect with wetlands, right? Because we're in the Great Lakes wetlands forest region, the Carolinian zone. So when I really thought about it, essentially, we removed nature and we didn't have to do that. So let's look at bringing nature back all around us and see what happens. And I got that great intro from Rachel, so I really don't need to say very much at all. I'm super fortunate that I had the opportunity to go to school and become a wildlife biologist. And I studied snakes for a long time, and then I got into habitat restoration. And then I really took a keen interest in plants and had that opportunity to work with indigenous elders and the traditional native plant inventory. And a lot of those things really shaped me as I moved away from a rural setting on Pelee Island. I was there for 12 years and I came into the city and I thought, okay, city living. And then when I realized I had a pretty significant yard, it was 52 feet. It's 52 feet by 217 feet deep. And I thought, wow, what are the opportunities here? And so that's why I'm speaking here today, because now it's been about 17 years since I started. I'm just going to image here so I can read this. Okay, so this is in a very big nutshell what we're looking at here. I used to give an hour-long presentation on just this slide, but I promise I won't be here for more than a few minutes. Prior to removal, the top point here, and this is my front yard here, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little bit later on, and I'll go through some of the species that are here and some of the orientation a little later. But for now, I'll just focus on the points on the left. Is that prior to removal of all of this habitat, once settlers came, there were vast forest ecosystems. Some of the sugar maples, for example, a lot of people love to focus on sugar maples because they're beautiful and they provide a lot for us as well. Some of them were 12 feet in diameter, and now that's probably several hundred years old, at least 400 or 500 years old. Nowadays in cities, when they get to not even a meter in diameter, so 3 feet, they die for various reasons of compaction, of poor air quality, not enough phytoncides in the air. And so we did have dense old growth forest here. And in our lifetimes, that's not really realistic to recover, but it certainly is a goal to look at the old growth forest to see what was there as hints of what we could start planting now. Martian soil on Earth, this is the second point, is that our soil biodiversity with bacteria and fungi and all sorts of microorganisms is pretty much gone once we remove the natural ecosystem. And we're talking about 4 to 5 million at least species per teaspoon when we go out into a natural old growth forest, probably 10 to 20 million. And that bacteria and fungi is fed by native plants, well, by all plants. But for the most part, native ecosystems are a lot more diverse. The soil roots produce exudates, which are sticky substances that have they have sugars, proteins, and carbohydrates. And that combination for every plant is different. And so they attract different bacteria and fungi. And of course, the bacteria and the fungi provide super services. The bacteria is the glue that holds the roots in the earth. The fungi is the aeration system that allows the plant to uptake nutrients and drink and not drown because of compacted soils. So I spoke in Toronto about native soils for an hour to the Toronto staff at one point, and this is shortchanging it. The fascination in the soil and the critical nature is just so evident. When I started this front yard, and I found a nursery around the corner that sold native trilliums, and I bought these trilliums for $10 each. I spent a couple $100 on trilliums, put them in the soil after removing the grass, and pretty much they all died because there wasn't the natural ecosystem within the soil. So this is something that we can learn through mosaics and all sorts of other ways to bring back this soil ecosystem, which will help our plants survive and thrive to the point now where my soils are so good that the plants reproduce and I have to thin them every year and share them with many other people. The third point here is about the layers. So for the most part, we've lost our canopy. And we've lost our canopy, even though in some older neighborhoods, we have a canopy like a savanna. So instead of over 60% cover of trees when you look up, we have between 40 and 60% cover, which is more like a natural savanna. And because there's very little understory and often cases, only grass for the ground cover, we have a system that is very different than a natural old growth forest. Forget just a regular forest, but a natural old growth forest. We have accounts of early settlers describing the environment, saying this is too humid. There are too many mosquitoes. There are too many trees and shrubs and plants on the ground. We have to change the climate. We have to make it drier. So essentially what we have in our neighborhoods, as you know, is concrete and asphalt and wind that will pick up a lot of the moisture that exists. So even though you're looking at my front yard here that looks like a budding forest, I have to water it a lot. We see it advertised a lot that go with a forest with native plants, you won't have to water as much. I have to water a lot, actually, and I'm okay doing that, even though it's an added expense. And it goes against the counter thing that we hear, you don't have to water very much. Soon, once they're really established, you have to water less. But because we don't have this overarching forest ecosystem, we have a lot of dryness, and dryness kills a lot of things and prevents a lot of diversity from occurring. So that's my next point there, is that we went from a moist forest to a dry, hardtop savanna. And of course, that's a bigger statement when we look globally. A lot of people skim over climate change news these days because most of it is very negative. And if you really talk to a climate scientist, most of them won't tell you the truth because there's a lot of criticism when we hear that within a few decades we'll have 1 billion climate change refugees. The estimates from a lot of the work I've looked at recently, and these are reputable scientists, that between 2050 and 2150, the number of people that will die from climate change is in the billions. So a lot of this is underrepresented in the mainstream media because people just don't want to be that negative. And so this is the small scale, looking at things drying out to the large scale. The next point I have here is big horticulture and big hurt. This is not a slam against anybody, any specific person in an industry, but when we want plants and we go to buy plants, we have to look very hard to find native plants. And there's some really great native plant nurseries out there, and a lot of really great native plant nurseries out there don't make enough money and go under. And when we can even find them, it's often very difficult to find larger plants that are more prone to survive. So because the idea of gardening in the beginning was that we want an English garden, we had a lot of the plants from the English garden, which were taken from a lot of other parts of the world. And so now we have beautiful plants in most of our horticulture industry that are from other parts of the world. And there are some great signs. Some of the individual native plants that are deemed to be attractive are showing up in big horticultural sites. And a few nurseries are actually starting to prevent the sale of some of the non-native species that are invasive. And we're really behind in this. We should have been doing this 15, 20 years ago because a lot of these non-native plants will escape because birds eat their berries and they get spread throughout our natural areas. And because the soils have changed, because we talked about this, and also there's the earthworms that aren't native that are here now. So a lot of our soils are changed to be more similar to southern US soils or soils that are found over in Europe. So horticulture is at the stage right now where they can play huge hero and start to cultivate a lot of the plants, being sure to use plants that are from that region and not just plants that have big bright flowers, but the native plants as they exist in the wild. And we see that happening, and there are a lot of great signs, and yet we have to do this really quickly. So native plants and insects. This is the second last point here. I talked to you a little bit about this earlier, about meeting with Douglas Tallamy, who's an entomologist, studies insects, and not the first one, but certainly the rock star scientist who has written a number of books, has ranked a number of native plants in terms of their ability to host insect populations, because insects are the first form to convert that plant matter into protein, and then that moves up the food web. And so if you get a chance to read Bringing Forest or Bringing Nature Home, it's an incredible book from over 10 years ago, and a lot of people have that. More recently, he's written The Nature of Oaks and a couple of other books that are super accessible and really helpful to guide someone who wants to do it themselves. And the last thing, of course, kind of goes with the horticulture, is that the perceptions of beauty. We really need to talk about the acceptance of, is this on the right here a pretty garden that we're seeing? To a lot of people will say, well, yeah, there's some color there and there's some structure there, and it's a little messy, and you've got some yellow leaves on the ground. And to some people, it's not manicured enough. And to me, this is a great intermediate solution. Even though I could be a better designer, and there certainly are better designers out there that can do better things with native plants. And I'll show you a couple of these images. I talked about soil. This isn't my graphic, it's from the UN. Like I said, we could speak for hours and hours about soil, and it's actually really fascinating. Plants, of all of the things I mentioned earlier, that plants create exudates and they attract bacteria and fungi, which coexist with them and are critical for them. One thing that I would say about this graphic that actually isn't described here is that the bacteria and the fungi fight microorganisms to protect the plant roots. When some of those bacteria and fungi die, that's the time when the plants can actually uptake the nutrients from the dead bacteria and fungi. So this is a critical relationship. This isn't a relationship of, it's kind of nice because they hold the root systems in place and they prevent erosion, they prevent flooding because the fungi creates the spaces through which the water can flow down instead of running quickly over a hard top. It's essential. I really urge you to read more about soil and to, as they say, don't treat soil like dirt. Insects. Insects are critical and are best found when we have native plants, right? Because they've co-evolved with native plants, and as Douglas Tallamy has shown, they can eat a lot of the plant structures, and then larger insects eat them, and then they're picked up by different things like frogs and lizards, and then they're picked up by birds, and it moves up the food chain. These are just a couple of articles here that if you look at what's happening because of habitat loss and climate change. So often nowadays people are talking about just climate change. If we used habitat and restored habitat, climate change could almost be completely mitigated. So yes, it's important to talk about climate change, but let's remember the foundation, that a lot of these collapses that we're seeing are because of habitat loss initially. And now the dialogue certainly needs to be about climate change and things that we can do, because there are more things beyond um, recovering habitats, but that's one of the biggest things to do. So insects are declining for a number of reasons. We're not using a lot of native plants in certain areas. And of course, with stochastic weather events happening, because climate change isn't just about the earth warming, it's about flash freezing, heat waves, droughts, fires. All of these things are contributing to the loss of insects. And of course, insects are the foundation of the food web, and native plants feed insects. So on the far right here, I have a friend of the family. For a while, I was raising giant silkworm moths, and this family in particular has a lot of shagbark hickories in their yard, and not many people in a city have shagbark hickories, and that's one of the host plants for the Luna moth. And so I brought a number of these moths over to release that would lay their eggs on the leaves of the species and repopulate. And of course, there are a lot of other issues that we could talk about, like some of the giant silkworm moths aren't present in cities anymore because after they lay their eggs and the eggs turn into caterpillars and go through various instars, some of those cocoons, the chrysalis, after the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis, can remain on the tree, but a number of them drop off and need to be in the leaf litter, and too few of us recognize this or are willing to put up with leaf litter, at least on the sides of our properties. And so a lot of these insects are just swept away and composted and then sold back to residents. So a lot of things we can do here. So I'll talk a little bit about my place here, a little bit of a show on what happened. I did start to design things, and I'm not a designer, I'm not a landscape artist. I learned from a few people, and I've done some trial and error. And lately I've designed some bigger gardens and bigger centers. And it's interesting because it's all tied to lighting and water. How much lighting and water and how much space will a plant take, and what kind of what kind of layers are you looking for? And so there's a lot of learning that we go through as we're going through it on our own, or as a lot of the really good designers have gone to school to learn this stuff. And the outcome from my simple hand drawing on the left there is that we can go to any different level. Like if we're designing a prairie, we can have lower plants in front and the taller ones in the back, and we can go for biodiversity, or we can have big open spaces. This one on the bottom left, I used in my talks for over 12 years now. This is an earth ship. I did one time build a smaller version of an earth ship on Peely Island, and there's a pond pool in front of this one. This particular one is in Germany. But as you notice, and I've been reading trends lately, I do go on LinkedIn quite a bit. There are a lot of people that are doing a lot of fascinating things. And apparently earth ships will be a lot more common in the future because it takes a lot less energy to heat them and cool them. And if you see this house in the background there, you notice that on the top, you can vegetate it. And when you can vegetate it, you don't have to manage it as much. It provides additional cooling. And when we talk about prairie, and I've mentioned this and done a fair bit of research, and climate change, for example, if we had a lot of people doing these sorts of things in their yards, it would be a huge impact. If we had a lot of people doing this sort of thing in, for example, the American Midwest, I've seen one study that shows within 10 years, if we recovered all of the prairie, the tall grass, the short grass, the mixed grass species, we could sequester all of the excess carbon in the atmosphere. And so while there are technological things we could do, and we could convert to hybrids and then electric cars, we really have the solution in the plant, the individual plant multiplied by people and by space. So that's really hopeful, and it might be too late for the vast majority of the people on Earth, but it certainly is a solution in the short term to help make life more manageable over the next 120 years. So this is my individual front yard. I showed you this earlier from the roadside view. This is now from the second floor, and this is 5 years ago. So these trees that you see are double the size. And I'll just name some of them. For example, the yellow one that you see in the foreground is the Kentucky coffee tree. The two darker red ones are eastern flowering dogwood, and to the left of that eastern flowering dogwood on the right-hand side, that's a black cherry tree. There's also cucumber magnolia here. There is dwarf hackberry, dwarf chinkapin oak, bur oak, pawpaw. There's also an American basswood, a red oak, and it goes on and on. This is a tiny space, and some of my neighbors have come over and pleaded with me, please don't plant them so close together. Please don't do this. You're really going to regret this. And you know, there is a lot of maintenance here, and you may have heard the term the Miyawaki forest, which has gained a lot of popularity in the last couple of years, even though it's been around for decades. It's from a Japanese individual who planted in a circle high density plantings of shrubs and trees so that they would compete for sunlight and grow super tall super quickly. And that's sort of the theory here, and yet I do have a lot of brown layer vegetation, like from plant rescues. I have over 150 trilliums in front and backyard. That's Short's aster that you can see that's purple. You know, there are, I think, 11 endangered species here that I got from various plant rescues, which, you know, I was going for common species and I took out mosaics, and of course the rare endangered plants just showed up. So I didn't, of course, intentionally go to dig those out from sites that were being destroyed. And I can hear a lot of you laughing, even though it's completely silent. So I know that I'm getting a good reaction from this. Sometimes when you're doing these Zoom talks, you're kind of thinking, wow, did that go flat? But yes, there's a lot of great diversity in this tiny little plot of land, and I'm tracking it over time and looking at the insect species that have occurred as well. And then this is a section of the backyard with a big wetland system. This is a bit of a redo here, but if you look in the foreground, I've got a 3.5-foot pond with a waterfall and reservoir, 25 species of native wetland plants all around this. Some of them aren't up yet because it's early in the season. And then I've got an overflow in that reservoir that trickles down to a dragonfly cell, which has no fish, because a lot of fish will eat the dragonfly larva. And then just to the left of, or just to my right, but your left of where I'm standing, I'm actually standing on a bridge here. And just to my right, the photo is a biological filtration cell. So that dragonfly cell overflows and it goes through the biological filter. The water runs under my feet and goes back into the pond. So I call it a complete backyard wetland system. And I've had incredible things that have shown up here. You know, one of the highlights would be several black-throated blue warblers drinking water. A lot of migratory songbirds in the spring will listen for the sound of water. So if you leave this on in April and May, they'll show up in the morning and they'll spend the better part of the morning feeding on insects in the trees and drinking water in the wetland. And again, I could tell so many stories about some incredible things that have returned here, and I'll just show a few different angles here. The top left shows the vegetation growing in. Because my backyard system is largely forested with big trees, a lot of these wetland plants are like in a savanna setting, and so they grow really tall to search for light. So I do prune this on occasion to keep it low and to make it look manicured. And then the bottom photo here is looking at that dragonfly cell. And then you can see in the center of the bottom photo is the overflow of the biological filter that has cattails and blue flag iris, cardinal flower, and that overflows into the main pond. The top right there is a pond that I built for Dr. Barry McFarlane, an incredible conservationist who is with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. This is out near the University of London. Sadly, Barry is moving to upstate New York with her husband for a new opportunity. Sad for us, great for her. And I think they have like a beautiful 50-acre property now that they will restore. So it was really great to have the opportunity to build this with Fari and her husband Brent. And they certainly got a lot of joy out of this. And you can see we're trying to actually blend it into the landscape. And then, of course, where she's standing on the other side, it since has filled in with native plants. So it really looks like a feature that was a part of the landscape. Just a couple of other angles at my place that you might want to see. This is the bottom left is the boulevard, and this is where I planted, I think I have 12 species of native plants, and you can see some dense blazing stars, some gray-headed coneflower. I've also got chinkapin oak, dwarf chinkapin oak, sand cherry, all sorts of great things growing in this boulevard. I had a complaint by the city. As someone, one of my neighbors complained last year about my boulevard, and I was really sweating the city come out because I heard a few years ago someone's native plant garden was mowed down because they were away on holidays, and I guess it had overgrown, and there were complaints. So I put a sign up that said, you know, this front yard has 11 endangered species. It has this and this and this. And then I waited for the city, and they showed up, and she showed me the corners of where there had to be sight lines for the driveways. That was her concern. And then I showed her the boulevard, and she said, "Oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. I would not change a thing. We need more of this." And she went on and on about it. And I was just like, I had this warm feeling in my heart, and I was like, we're getting there. We are really getting there. And I said, what about the complaint? And she said, well, maybe trim it a bit so it doesn't go on the road, and don't worry about it. So I was super happy. And then you can see this picture on the right. These are Michigan lilies that were growing right by my front steps one year when it was a good year for Michigan lilies. Sometimes they disappear, and other years they come back. And this year they were almost 5 feet tall. And they're not always like this. And it's hard again when you have a lot of shade. You're trying to grow things because they want to grow super tall and then they fall over. So there's definitely some management that you have to do around that. And then some of the things that showed up, which was super exciting. And if you've seen any of my talks before, some of these photos are recycled, but it's still worth the story. In the top right, we had toads come in and lay thousands of eggs. And at one point, our backyard was covered in thousands of toadlets. And then it was actually a couple months earlier that I saw the screech owl in the center there. And I sent it to a friend of mine. This one's actually an owlet, but he was an adult. And he was like, oh, that's really cool. Look, it's got intergrades of the east and west, because the eastern subspecies and the western, one is red, one is more gray. That's really cool. Then I sent him another photo, and he said, no, that's a different owl. Look at this. That's totally different. And then I was about to cut down this willow tree in the backyard that was breaking all the time. And my wife was like, no, 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 I love the willow tree. And so I went out there and I said, no, I got to trim it heavily. And then I found a nest of screech owls in the willow tree. And then on the top left there, you can see the 3 owlets that spent a lot of time on our deck in our cedar tree. And we would go out there for coffee and tea, and they would just hang out, and their parents would come and feed them. And then one day we found the parents mid-afternoon teaching the young how to feed on the toadlets from the pond. And then it was just like, what? Mid-daylight, they're feeding? And then it was like, oh, we added the water and the native plants. We got things like a swamp darner that came in and laid their eggs, that dragonfly in the bottom right. Their young will live as larvae in the water for up to 7 years, feeding on mosquito larvae. And so it was just all hitting home that all of these things were so interconnected, and we had so many things come in when we added all these native plants, when we added water, when we created cover, when we, and we still had a yard to have barbecues and really enjoy life. So it wasn't like we were just saying, nature, take it all back. We were saying that, but we were also saying we really wanted to enjoy it as well. And then on bottom left there, we had a lot of dragonflies that returned. And then this is a tulip tree silkworm moth, one of the species through Marion Shore that I helped recover and release in the city. I think we released about 50 of these over 5 years. And we do have very large tulip trees that are mature in our backyard. So undoubtedly, these species are breeding here. And in fact, the Promethea giant silkworm moth, I was wondering, do we have any of these moths still left in the city? I was away for a few days when they were metamorphosing, and I got back, and there was a female Promethea in the cage because she'd metamorphosed. There were 12 males flying around the cage trying to get in, 12 wild males still in the city. So there is a lot of hope for recovering habitat and some of the wildlife that will come once we do that. So there are a few things here that I would love to hit home, so to speak. And that's that a lot of people tend to forget, and probably not the people on this call, on this talk today, but our homes really can be vibrant, safe, and healthy and immersed in a forest setting. A lot of people think you have to remove this, or you can only put in things that are very small. In fact, when we plant trees more closely together and they grow taller and they look maybe precarious, the roots are intertwined, they're sharing things through the mycorrhizal network, they're healthy and a lot stronger, and then of course buffering each other from high winds. Second point, forests can thrive in towns and cities. And when we really start to look at how we can bolster soils, and I talk about that not today, but I do talk about that at length in other areas, then that diversity can come back pretty quickly. And the third point is, and a lot of you are here for this, is that your actions can have a huge impact when they're cumulative. And it's not just cumulative that my plants are going to sequester this much carbon or prevent this much flooding and erosion. It's not that. It's the fact that you're there doing it and people see you doing it. And then you're talking about it. And before you know it, you're having a big influence. I didn't even need to do all the talking because a lot of our forest plants have elaiosomes on their seeds, which are fleshy parts on the seed, which are high in lipids and proteins. And the ants collect these seeds, take them to their colonies, pull off the elaiosomes, and rear their ants with them. Then they take the discarded seeds and plant them in the forest, or in this case, plant them in my neighbors' yards. And both of my neighbors are like these master gardeners that have beautiful yards. They wouldn't have anything to do with it, of course, right? Look at me in my position. And yet they both came to me and said, did you plant this in my yard? Like, come and take a look at this. And I looked at bloodroot and I said, no, that was ants harvesting elaiosomes to feed their young. And I said, I'll dig it out and I'll put it in mulch. And they're like, no, it's actually got a pretty flower, right? So there's a starting point, and I didn't have to do all the work myself. And the last point here is a part that I don't really get into here, but it's in the course. I talk about the fact that native plants, nice ecosystems all around, having more bird species in your backyard, the sounds of nature, having the natural patterns, the fractal patterns, all puts us in our parasympathetic nervous system, which stops our cortisol production, which calms us, makes us less prone to disease. This is the foundation for forest therapy or forest bathing. So part of what I do now is a design where there are sit spots, a design where you have running water, a design where you have maybe a miniature garden with uh, tiny evergreen trees, coniferous trees, so that you get the scent of phytoncides, which is the natural tree hormone, pinene that helps uh, put us into the parasympathetic. So we can design all of this in ways that really helps bring us to our senses, literally, because we're so often caught in our minds and our thought and our worries that we don't get to that state where we're relaxed and really need to be enjoying the fruits of our labors, the design, everything that we've done, that we've put into our yardscape. So a consequence of inaction, and I don't like to scare anybody, and a lot of people talk about things that they're against. Well, let's really focus on things that we're for. And when we do work like this, we can be for creating greater nature connection. It has so many health benefits. And then when we start to do this, because it's just natural to be immersed in nature, then we realize that our local environment starts to feel a little more moist, and that a lot of our trees and plants and shrubs don't need as much watering. And so we're changing our local environment. And the more of us that start to change this climate means that the climate overall is changing. And of course, species extinction is another negative thing that I used to focus on. We're in the sixth greatest mass extinction of all time. Sorry, the sixth mass extinction, and it's the greatest one of all time. And that doesn't seem to go very far. If you notice, things like Extinction Rebellion is always viewed as so negative, but things like climate change seem to have a little more acceptance, even though it's heartbreaking to see how many species are in trouble from the actions of ourselves. And so the actions that we have can have a huge impact, as I've been talking about the last little while. And so here's a little bit on this course that I'll be offering, releasing it in about a month. And this is a little bit of the promotional stuff here. So the language is a little different than the armor of climate change, because essentially that's what we're doing. We're taking a little chip out of the big problem, and in a cumulative effort, it's going to have a massive impact. And throwing an uncivilized welcome back party for local wildlife. That's what I think to some degree has happened with me, because it's been a little haphazard over the last 12 or 15 years. It's because some things didn't work, and a lot of it was trial and error, and now I'm really honing in on what the wetland needs and how the forest ecosystem needs to thrive, and what to do with so many of the plants that are reproducing now that the soils are really strong. And then the thing that often we feel so futile about is that we can really bask in the knowledge that we're a part of this conscious collection of, I call it burgeoning amateur yardscape players saving the day. And it might not save the day, but I would call myself an amateur, even though I'm a professional ecologist, and now I do a lot of work in forest therapy, and I'm working a lot with schools and recovering habitats to create nature, right outside the door nature. To some degree, there's always someone who knows more than us. And yet, to know that we've done something is something that I have to have every day. Otherwise, I look at the news and I feel like, how can I live with myself? And I look at future generations and what they're inheriting from us. And of course, the last one is the ultimate hope is that, cue the Hollywood sunset. There can be a major comeback, and we do see it in a lot of areas. And I can show a couple of pictures here and there. So if you're interested in this course, there's a bit of a breakdown here. It's about the land's past stewards. So I look at not just the settler history, but the history of Indigenous people, and then before Indigenous people, because really as a species, we've only been around for a couple 100,000 years. And then looking at the sense of place, of what our place is now in the context of having a city all around. 3 R's of bringing forest home. Major gardening types in Eastern North America, design and sourcing of native plants, installation of gardens, getting help if you're doing a lot of it on your own, becoming an ecosystem guide in the sense that our circle of influence will really go out there and impact our neighbors and beyond. And then a lot about the local wildlife, who is coming back and how to identify them and promote this. And then about reconnecting the forest therapy element in knowing that we are really creating this for ourselves and for the plants and for the wildlife that's coming back. So thank you so much. We don't have a lot of time for questions. Here's some contact information. And I really appreciate everybody that came out today, and I'm happy to answer some questions then.
Thank you. That was amazing. And it's always so exciting to see what you're doing and to see what we wish we had going on in our yards as well. I
Thanks.
do have a couple questions here from the chat. The first one came while we were talking about soil. So it says, I've heard that earthworms are imports from Asia. Did fungi do this work of creating spaces in soil before earthworms arrive?
Yes, fungi does that work to create spaces and creates a lot of access for water, but also for the plant to be able to breathe and to uptake water and nutrients. And earthworms are changing the soil so much so that, like I said, they promote the growth of plants from other parts of the world, and also they have so many different impacts, from virtually removing all of the leaf litter and sticks that are really critical for a lot of insects and other microorganisms to overwinter.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's definitely something I've been trying to do is leave the leaves, as they say, and make sure that um like I'm making use of what the garden has in it and keeping that in the garden. So yeah,
Great.
definitely. I have another question about soil. It
Okay.
says, I have a yard that is mostly sand. Do I try to bolster the soil to make it more carbon or have more organics? Or do I try to keep the original soil type? For example, are we trying to move all our gardens to a rich loam?
Yeah, no, if you go to some of the natural areas that are sand-based, like Rondo Provincial Park, for example, that's not too far away, you can see some of the ecosystems there and some of the plants that will thrive in that ecosystem. Some things won't do well here because they need more organic matter and a little bit more moisture that will stay in the soil. But you have things like tulip tree and some of the like wild ginseng and all sorts of incredible things that grow down in that park, and some areas up in Pinery, which is equally as close, maybe even closer, that you can see things that are growing there, like wild lupins and other things. So
Mm,
it's just really different types of plants that you really should target to grow there. And yeah, there does sometimes certain plants will create a better soil that you can get, like a graminoid crust that's growing that's often found in certain prairies. But things like prairie plants will do
mhm.
really well in sandy soils or rocky soils as well. So yeah, a lot of opportunity to get plants that love that. And I wish I had some of your sand. Maybe we
Mm.
can exchange for something.
Yeah, no, that's great. All right, just a couple more here. Someone wants to know if you have spice bush on your property.
Yeah, I have spice bush growing here and I've had it for 15 years, and it took 12 years before I finally got the spice bush swallowtail butterfly to lay eggs on the spice bush. When I brought in the hop tree, within 20 minutes, a giant swallowtail female laid
Mm,
eggs, and they're back every year. And I've
mm,
seen the spice bush lay eggs, and I've seen the caterpillars now on my spice bush, and I've seen the chrysalis, and I've watched a spice bush swallowtail come out on my shrub, and it's just so rewarding. So
mm,
yeah, they apparently like kind of sun on the east, and so there are a few things. I think they'll grow in sandy locations and in locations that have more loam. So from what I've seen, a lot of people have them in London. The red berries are gorgeous. They go a nice yellowish color in the fall, just spectacular. And oh, that butterfly made it completely worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Just two more questions here, I think. Any ideas on how we can add some naturalization projects to the neighborhood decision-making grants opportunity?
Yeah, I've learned a little bit about that. It's really about finding your people in your neighborhood that would support it, right? Because there's so many great causes that come up in these neighborhood proposals, and I talked to the city about, we've done designated self-guided forest therapy trails in Newfoundland, like at Rosemore National Park. We've done it with Ontario Parks now up in McGregor Point, and we've done it with the city of Thunder Bay and Markham. And I was thinking along these lines too, because it really helps people experience nature in a different way, and you don't need a certified guide. And yet, when I looked at the application, there were some just really great ideas that people had, either sharing, like herbs for cooking for people who couldn't afford to buy fresh things. And I think that got supported 1 year. So support that and maybe show it off in a demonstration garden in front of your place, because I think where you're getting at when you go around the city, and it's easy for us to say because we don't work for the city, like every time I drive around, oh, look at that lawn, look at that lawn, look at that corner. And a lot of people will be saying, there should be vegetables growing there, and there should be, native plants, and it's true, and it's a lot to manage, right? And there are, a lot of constituents who still love grassy green places, so that's going to change over time. So just find your community, do your own demonstration, buy, and you'll get the support.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, and I have those thoughts as well, but it always is a question of managing and whose responsibility is it, and all those questions
Yeah,
that as much as we'd like every place to be
yeah,
to see naturalization and whatnot. Or speaking of
right.
managing, oh, sorry.
What's that? Sorry.
Oh no, I thought you said something. I have
Oh, no, no,
just
no.
two more questions here.
Okay,
Speaking
great.
of managing, how do you manage these intense or smaller scale plantings? I noticed many of the trees in your front yard will eventually grow quite tall. And I'll just say
Yeah.
before you answer that, we at Reforest planted our first two Milwaukee forests, mini forests, this past year as well. So it's something that
Great.
maybe is a an all around question that you can answer.
Yeah, well, when they're really young, I trim them up as high as I can, and I do enjoy climbing trees, and I go on ladders a lot to do this kind of stuff, and I know a lot of people can't do that. And it will get out of range for me at some point, so it is a major consideration, and that's why probably some people have told me, you might be in trouble later. It's going to be very expensive, and I think, and we went through this at the lab school in Toronto where we planted this 5,000 square foot. I call it a nature sense ground. It's got a forest that has 175 native species in the forest on the schoolyard, right outside the door. And we planted eastern white pine 10 feet away from the school, right? So in 30 years, it'll probably be 75 feet. And so there will be concerns for the future. So my answer is, unfortunately, I don't know. I'm doing everything that I can now, but it feels to me a lot more urgent to get these things established. And hopefully, everything doesn't need to be managed at once. And we can plan these things out as we're going, and in knowing that we we do need to be land stewards in the sense that when we're in urban settings, we do have to manage. So it's a really good question, and I wish you hadn't asked it because I don't have a better answer. But that's all I've got.
Yeah. I know, I think that's entirely valid. Is we can learn as we go, and making that first step, and moving forward with good intentions is how we get to our the next phase of
Yeah,
learning. So definitely. Okay, last
yeah,
question. I know we've
right.
reached our time. Is application of commercially available mycorrhizae acceptable, and what do you think about that?
application of commercially available. So going
Yeah,
out
so
and
probably
buying
like,
it, yeah,
yeah,
I don't think it's readily acceptable, but I bet you could find it online. And in my, I think it just comes naturally, especially if you're doing mosaic planting. So if, like for example, I have had the opportunity. One time I was at a 50-acre site in an hour west of London, and it had just been bulldozed, and it was a beautiful forest, and most of the timber had been cleared, and there were probably, I think in 50 acres, probably 200,000 trilliums that were coming up in the June sun and getting baked. And I got about 250 at that time. And I shared them with a lot of people because I didn't have space for them. And there were so many other plants I could have gotten, but just by getting those soils, and if you think about the native soils having intact 50 million species of bacteria and fungi per teaspoon, we're really bringing in the seeds of what we need to get. And I'm not suggesting anybody go out there and do that in a forest. But we have ways of finding mosaics and doing that. And that's what I've done at the lab school and the theater district in Toronto. And that's what I've done with a lot of the projects that I've worked on to help speed up the process. So probably, and I would go a different route because you don't know really what you're getting if you're buying it from somebody. So are you sure we can't keep going? This is just,
I know it's fun. I think that's all the questions we have for now for you
oh,
though.
okay,
So
great.
I really appreciate your time today, and
Yeah.
we all appreciate the important work you're doing, and we're
Yeah.
really glad that you can share that with us. So yeah, a huge thanks to you for your participation today. I know it's like I learned some things, and I'm running these webinars, and just it's exciting for me as well to be watching and learning. So
Well,
um,
thanks, Rachel. And I just put a plug for Reforest London. I've had the chance to work there off and on in contracts a lot earlier, and just quality people doing amazing work. So we get the chance to volunteer with them or support them. Thank you, Rachel, for the opportunity.
yeah, thanks. No, I'm lucky to be a part of this as well. So.
Yeah,
All right, so I'll just do like a last little, I guess, plug for myself. We are running our there we are. We're running our conference in the next 2 weeks. In about 2 weeks, we're running a 2-day conference. All the sessions are free. We're offering pre-approved ISA credits for most of the sessions that are running over the 2 days. It's entirely virtual. So anybody who's interested in joining and learning about something for even one session or two, or if you want to stay for the whole thing, we have that going on. And again, we'd like to thank Natural Resources Canada for our 2 billion trees funding, enabling us to run this education series, and some of our other projects here at the Westminster Pond Center. So keep an eye on our social media, keep an eye on if the newsletter is something you're subscribed to. You'll see all of our upcoming sessions through there as well. So that's just what's coming up on my end. But a
super.
huge thank you again to you, Ben, and we look forward to working together more in the future as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, enjoy the
Bye.
rest of your day.
You too. Bye.